Good morning, afternoon, or evening, folks, and welcome to Cast of All Trades, the show where we talk about developing skills, exploring ideas, and following curiosity. I'm your host, Orion Siebert. In this episode, I'm joined by Thomas Wilson, a professional game master and storyteller who helps neurodiverse people. What is life like for the neurodiverse? How can we use games and stories to improve our lives? How can we become better storytellers and communicators? We answer these questions and much more in this interview. Personally, I really enjoyed this interview with Thomas. It was fun for me to connect with him over a shared love of storytelling and tabletop RPGs. In this interview, we talk a lot about the principles behind becoming a better storyteller, what life is like for the neurodiverse. But if you really take a step back and listen to these principles, not just tied to this idea of tabletop RPGs and storytelling, you can see these principles can apply on many aspects outside this world. They can apply in the world of business, in the world of general living, in stressful situations. There's so many great gold nuggets that Thomas digs up in this episode, and love it if you listened all the way through. If you want more episodes like this where you'll find glorious gold nuggets, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more episodes like these. I think that about covers it. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to Thomas Wilson. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
So, before we really dive into it, up front, I did a lot of research and prepping to really get into this episode because there's a couple topics here that I'm not the most familiar with, such as neurodiversity and a couple other things that you've mentioned in a couple other interviews. And one thing that you said in one of your interviews that I really want to briefly touch on is up front, I want to let you know I like going deep here. So if you have any thoughts that pop into your head or anything you really want to touch on in the moment that totally derails the conversation, let's go for it. The motto of the show here is developing skills, exploring ideas, and following curiosity. So let's explore some ideas if they happen to come up.
Okay.
Yeah. So first off, tell me a bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
So, a bit about who I am. My official name is Thomas R. Wilson. I have the R in there to differentiate myself from other Thomas Wilsons in the world. But I also, the R, I've kind of given myself over the years this username which I use online, which is Roadhawk, and that's actually been with me through over a decade of online work, from working at magazines, online publications, to running videos on YouTube's and other things like that. And part of the reason I keep that in there is just an acknowledgement of that. My actual business name is R&H Creative Advocacy, and if you didn't hear the full thing, if you're listening or anything, I actually added the R and H for Roadhawk to honor my time in my professional career as I've gone. But the work that I provide is sensory-friendly care, from public speaking to neurodiversity, Dungeons and Dragons, to content development, to at this point I do a little bit of everything. I'm even going to be running a D&D camp, Dungeons and Dragons camp, where I'm going to be helping youth in my community develop their self-advocacy. Um, and then a couple things to note there. My work is really designed around the idea that active play and creative expression is such an integral part of the human experience, and that there are so many different ways to utilize that to help people gain access to the community, build peer-to-peer relationships, and simply have fun and be able to share their voice. My inspiration from this really comes from being a neurodiverse youth in a time when neurodiverse I don't think was a term, or at least one not regularly used in the 90s, early 2000s, as well as living with my own mental health diagnosis and realizing that a lot of establishments, a lot of organizations want to help people, but they're not really set up for it. And I'm not talking about like a lot of the state-run organizations, which I could get into, but I don't really want to for the sake of not making someone mad. Um, I'm talking like organizations that are supposed to work with youth that have struggles, and those youth are deemed too disruptive for a program, or too angry for a program, or they don't communicate well, and so they're kicked out. And my focus is really also on the mentality that I don't like the idea of what people call problem clients or problem youth, because I find a lot of that is really centered around behaviors that tie to various diagnoses that are really just a part of what someone's living with. And people tend to use those terms when they don't want to work with them because it doesn't make them happy. So, in all of that, that's kind of a little long winded, but a little more detailed explanation of why I do what I do. But it's also just built on the back that stories are what connect human beings. They've been around as long as we've been around for reasons, and they help us to connect to our humanity, our emotions, and our understanding of the world. And I love that.
Absolutely. As someone who's been playing Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop RPGs for years, there's nothing like the ability to sit down and do storytelling with friends or even strangers, and there's something about it that can really bring people together and just help you grow in some ways. It's fascinating to me. As you were talking about your introduction, you briefly mentioned this idea of problem children, where it's mostly children that perhaps educators is probably the most common place that I'd see this term being used, where they'll say, oh, young Timmy's just a problem child. Go get him checked out, go put him on something. It's a question that I really want to ask. I don't know if it's insensitive or not. I might ask some insensitive questions here and there. It's mostly just out of ignorance, if anything. But uh, do you think that we might be overdiagnosing mental illness slash neurodiversity in some kids? And I ask this because some of what I'm seeing and hearing in certain school systems where young Timmy may be like super hyper, super active. He wants to go out and play and do things, which in my mind that's just a totally normal kid. But to the teacher, young Timmy's a problem child that needs something to keep him still in his chair. So do you think there might be something to that?
I definitely think there's something to that. And if anyone's listening and has these experience, I just want to give a quick trigger warning. I'm going to talk about a couple things that like school problems, education systems, and kind of the labeling of children around a diagnosis. So I just want to give that heads up. I do think that there is some of that, and I don't think it's necessarily on the kids' fault. I think a lot of educators and a lot of schools are built around the idea that the teacher's always right,
Mm-hmm.
or the established hierarchy is right, and the youth are often the problem. I know there's a lot of schools nowadays that challenge that, all the teachers fighting for that. But one of my big frustrations with the school system is for the longest time as a country in the United States, we've known that it doesn't work well. It doesn't serve the majority of youth, that there's a lot of different ways kids learn, but that's not changing. It's not impacting enough in schools. And I think part of it, for the first part of this answer, I think part of it is really around the idea that we have understaffed teachers. We're putting too many kids in a classroom, and we're really blaming kids for a system that just doesn't work. And whether or not they have a diagnosis, when you're crammed in with 30 students, you have a teacher who's stressed out, you have potentially thousands of kids in a school, that's not a conducive environment to anyone. Like that's not healthy. But diving into the second part a little bit, which is I think kids do get overdiagnosed, but I think part of that, and this is an important preface, is it's we the American healthcare system is very much built around the idea of diagnose. A lot of it is diagnose someone and then don't really set them up for actual success.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of problems within healthcare in general in the United States. There's a lot of problems within the mentality. And I think we're seeing this in a lot of veins. Like people are diagnosed wrong. And I should state, diagnosis is an incredibly complicated system that can change radically by doctor to doctor as a person grows. Myself, I've had dozens of diagnoses, some of them right, some of them wrong. I've had doctors tell me I have autism, some tell me I don't. I've had people tell me I'm neurodiverse, some people not. And a lot of it comes into the mindset of where is the doctor at and how do they work with those youth? Because it's a lot easier to diagnose someone, even if it's wrong or even if it's accurate, and then put them on a path that doesn't really work for them than putting in the details. And so I think it's a mix. But I think for a lot of those youth, they do have a diagnosis. It may just be wrong, or even the mindset going back to schools. A lot of schools are not set up for working with kids with diagnosis. And unfortunately, not to put blame on the students or the teachers, it's just having a kid who's struggling with a diagnosis, which happens to a lot of us, and then putting them back into that environment of thousands of students, 30 kids in a classroom, and then teachers who are getting burnt out because they're not being treated right, not giving the resources. It's going to make it hard, and it's going to make that a lot worse. And I think it's going to impact people's understanding of their own diagnosis. I don't think, I know it's going to impact a lot of people's understanding of their diagnosis. So I hope that gives kind of a, I know it's a little long winded again, but I hope that gives a little bit more detail in my thought process.
Absolutely. Long winded is fine, and there's so much nuance in this conversation. I know personally, I had a great experience in the school system, and I've had a number of neurodiverse friends in the school system who it worked well for them. I also know a lot of people who it didn't work well with, so it's obviously going to differ from person to person to person. And same thing with the medical field, where some kids are going to get better treatments. They might get a better diagnosis. They might get a better, I guess, prescription to maybe help them out. Some people might react to it better, some people worse. There's so much nuance that really goes into that conversation that we can't unpack it all. But I think you really did a good job at summing it up in a really well and easy to understand way. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, those kind of questions, I always try to be a little bit more detailed just for the sake of not giving someone information that isn't accurate or isn't good for them. So I appreciate your willingness to let me talk a little bit longer.
Yes. So can you tell me a bit about your personal experience with mental health growing up?
Definitely. So I've touched on this in several other podcasts, but a big part of the reason I do the work I do is I was one of those kids in the school system. It's actually kind of wild to me. When I was in, I think it was probably second grade, I was considered a prodigy, which this happens more than I think ever should in the school system and in the world in general, where I was considered highly intelligent. I actually, they said I had an IQ of a 40-year-old at that time, which is wild to me still. And then after I got diagnosed at it as a young kid, after a significant loss in my family, um, I started experiencing that mental health turn. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at 8 years old, which is an incredibly hard thing to deal with at an age when you're forming your communication in general, and then you deal with a loss and that world changing scenario. So I spent a lot of time in programs that didn't want to work with me. School system, which at one point adored me, then started calling me a problem child. I'm not going to name names, but I remember my fifth grade teacher would get into screaming matches with me, and she would yell, "You're going to go to jail. You're a problem," stuff like that. Things that should never happen to a youth at any point or adult at any point happened. And I spent a lot of my time going from loving school and loving reading to absolutely hating the experience. And that's given me a lot of interpretation of how I view school now. But I also spent a lot of my time being very isolated, being very alone and afraid because kids were afraid to hang out with me. I wasn't good at socialization, so then we tried programs. Again, not going to name names because I don't want to get any organization in trouble.
Of course.
I was deemed too disruptive for several programs. I got into some and absolutely hated it because it just made me unhappy to be there because I wasn't the happy-go-lucky kid. I was the kid that people would talk about behind my back or like several feet away, but I could tell at that age they were talking about me and considering me disruptive. And I'm very lucky that I had several people who really fought for me, like several people in my family, like my mother, my uncle, and my aunt. a few key adults, but it was a really rough, disruptive, really difficult time where I spent a lot of my life feeling alone. I hated myself. I was trying to figure out how to communicate what I needed when I got upset, and I didn't have a lot of those supports from programs and schools that actually helped me. Um, and it's a very common thing, more than it ever should be. But I was do that through college. I actually went to college mostly to prove that I could and prove teachers wrong. Um, but after I hit college, I started recognizing I really did want to do something for the community. And I won't go into too much detail yet, but I'll say like it's a very different thing when you love school, you love the programs you're in versus feeling like you're just the odd one out or the black sheep or that kid that you whisper about in school. And those experiences really did impact my life for a very long time.
Hmm. Again, thank you for being very honest about your experience. I know sometimes for many people it can be hard to share some of their negative personal experiences, but I know someone will be able to learn or grow or have some good experience from hearing you be able to talk about yours and be able to grow and really grow from it. So thank you for being so honest about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I learned at a young age there's a lot of people who aren't meant to share their story, but luckily I have the ability and the endurance to do it. So
Hmm.
it's a blessing.
So in that and in previous interviews that I've looked through of yours, you mentioned people that have put you down throughout your life, and some of your response was a building a just watch me mentality. And I have a very similar mentality in many situations. Why do you think this idea of just watch me? Why do you think that was your reaction?
Well, I think part of it is I come from a family that is was very opinionated. I'm very lucky and that for the majority of my life, I've been surrounded by very strong willed, very capable women in my life. My mother is like one of the most impressive people I know. She's done some really awesome stuff. My sisters, my aunts, several people I'm friends with. My best friend is a very stubborn individual, but the things that she achieves in her life and the things she does with her family are amazing. And I think for a lot of it, for me, that was a very strong contrast, and that a lot of my relationships with the women in my life were very much like not docile, kind of like 1950s expectation of what women should be. And I think in that, I also learned a lot of empathy from them, um, because a lot of my male influences, other than my Uncle Sal and my Uncle Mick, um, those two men are saints for a lot of reasons, were very negative. But I also think I picked up a very strong stubbornness from the positive people in my life. And I, I'm going to be completely blunt here. I feel like if you have a diagnosis, stubbornness is a survival skill. It keeps us moving, it keeps us going. And I think for me, a lot of the reason why I've said watch me try is that stubbornness, but also that the knowledge, even when I hated myself that I can do something that people said I wouldn't, and that idea that I don't have to live my life by other people's expectations were really strong in me, even from birth. And I'm not going to go into everything now because I really don't want to traumatize your audience, but there's been a lot of scenarios in my life where it was either die or keep moving forward. And I think for a lot of us, when we have that and you want to keep moving forward, the internal motivation is I'm going to prove you wrong no matter what you say. Doesn't always end well. I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of times where I could have made better decisions, but I think there's just something in me that's always been that way, and those supports were so instrumental.
Mhm. Do you think it was the strong women in your life and those good male influences that really dragged you out from perhaps the dark place that you were in, or do you think there was more to it?
I definitely think it was more to it, but I cannot understate the positive force of having people fighting for you other than yourself. I spent a lot of my life studying like documentaries, studying conversations, studying the people that I did lose in my life, because I've lost a lot of people. And I think one of the things that I learned was this world can be really hard. It can be really wonderful, but it can be really hard. And having people that you can grasp onto in moments of just sheer desperation and worry and panic, even if they end up yelling at you because you're making a bad decision or you're making or doing something that really irritates them, that's such a powerful thing. And I think a lot of people have more of those people in their life than they think they do. So having the knowledge that I had someone at some point fighting for me even when I wasn't fighting for myself, that's a gift, and it really does deserve to be appreciated.
Hmm. Life is a team sport, and
Mm-hmm.
the people on your team are going to make all the difference. So I would love it if you would take me back to the beginning of what brought you into the world of storytelling and tabletop RPGs.
Yeah, so very different points in my life. I'll start with the tabletop RPGs. I started with one of the jobs I have now, an organization called Angel Service LLC. I That's actually my best friend is the boss for that organization. Again, a really awesome individual, and I was invited to a game night one night down in Denver, hanging out with her now husband and some of his friends, and we were playing Call of Cthulhu. And wild, very dark game. It's definitely not for everyone.
One of my favorites personally.
It's a fantastic game, especially when it's run well. And I picked up a really big bug of, like you mentioned before, that camaraderie, getting people connected. But I've always known I wanted to be a storyteller. So about like 6 months, I feel like after that, I ran my first session. Definitely had a lot of room to grow, but the thing that really pulled me into that was just a feeling of human connection, but also getting to tell stories in a shared storytelling element. And that was, years and years ago now. But I started very slowly doing the work with the community, and it's been a lifelong, not a lifelong, it feels like a lifelong love affair with tabletop RPGs. So that was the initial start. But with actual stories, I've loved stories ever since I was really young. My mother and father would read books to me before I could even read. That's some of my favorite like thoughts with my family is just listening to stories. But I really feel like it was probably when I could first started talking. I was getting a little older, understood what a job was. One of the first really transformative experiences was Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. Um, I People can probably tell I'm a little bit of an edge lord just based on what I've experienced. But when you're 4 or 5 years old and you're getting angry at people because you don't like how they read The Raven from Edgar Allan Poe,
There's a right way to
uh,
do it, and there's a wrong way to do it, and clearly they're doing it the
absolutely.
wrong way.
Yeah, and you're arguing with adults because you don't like it. There was a particular kind of edge lord, but when I heard that poem, it's been a literal lifelong affair with Edgar Allan Poe, and I really understood what stories could be. The only other thing that really pushed me in that direction was Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss, I know he's world famous and everything, but the depth in those stories is amazing. And experiences like that really pulled me into what writers can be, what they can do, and it just sent me on this trajectory. And it's been a wild, beautiful experience.
Hmm. This is wonderful for me because I it's not often that I can hear so much of myself and the guests that I talk to. Some of my favorite memories as well were of my parents sitting down with my brother and I before bed, and they would be reading us books, and it would be those are some of my favorite memories there. And I remember sitting here, remember going back to my first D&D campaign that I ran, that was the dungeon master for, and it was bad. Like, everyone's first campaign is always bad, but there's still something so charming about it, something so like romantic and memorable. Of That's where I started my storytelling journey. And like, certainly going back now, there would probably be some things you would change about your Call of Cthulhu campaign or other earlier campaigns you've done, but there's still something so wonderful about it, that it's these small, almost seemingly insignificant things to most people that can really impact our lives for forever, really. And you touching on this idea of, like, it feels like you've been playing these games for lifetimes. Like, I get that, because as you're playing these games, you're inhabiting these new characters, and it almost does feel like this is a new personality, a new person that I'm inhabiting for a bit. And it does feel like lifetimes can go by at times. It's just such a wonderful thing, and it's fun for me to be able to share that with another person. So I do want to touch a bit more on this idea of tabletop RPGs. Why choose stories and tabletop RPGs to work with kids? I know we've touched on it a little bit, but I'd love if you could dig into it a bit more, of what makes these games so effective in mental health and personal development.
Um, so it's actually funny. As we were recording this, I had actually just submitted for a tabletop role playing system centered around emotions. I would say the name, but I don't have the permission to shout that out right now. But I think what a lot of people notice about tabletop RPGs once you've played it, as you said, is partially that realm of you get to play a character, you get to explore a whole nother world, live a different life. But part of the reason I chose it for youth, adults, various ages, is there is, and I don't know if the people who created Dungeons and Dragons or other tabletop RPGs decades ago really thought, oh, this is going to be something used to make a really positive impact on self advocacy, problem solving, things like that. But tabletop RPGs in their core, especially D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, there's such an element of decision making, real time fallout of actions, math skills, like decision making that can impact a whole world for years and years. There's so much aspect and power in that when you start implementing it in the way of asking people questions like, what is your character's favorite memory? What's their favorite meal? One of my favorites is that I run in a lot of campaigns, if not all of them, is what is your character thinking in this moment? It gives people the idea and the ability to look outside of themselves and explore the human relationship and experience through a way that can actually really help them develop these skills quickly and efficiently. The other aspect is, and I know that like Matt Mercer and Critical Role and Dropout, oh, I know I can think of every other name for the Dropout campaigns. Dimension 20. Um, these are games that are also so powerful in the mindset of human connection. And I really do believe, whether it's online or in person, these games help us to get over the grief of loss or deal with a hard week or a hard day, to overcome the pain of feeling embarrassed or even just to laugh. And I really feel like no matter the age, as long as you're able to understand, what emphasizes that even more is it's not just the game master telling the story, it's everyone gets to incorporate their own unique thing. And um, there's so much more that I could gush and gush and gush all day about the beauty of D and D and all these other systems. But the one thing I really do want to also highlight is, as we're moving into these ideas of these games being used more and more for this kind of play, this kind of style, there are so many third party creators and developers and all of these things that are actually sharing their story and what they wanted in the system and in their life, and they're using it to empower players around the world. And I think the best part about tabletop role playing games is the community when it's healthy and working, because it is this constant evolving, developing kind of like organism that really does want, so many people want to make the world a better place through their game.
Absolutely. There are a couple things that you touched on there that I want to elaborate a bit more on. You touched a bit on some of the skills that people can develop through playing tabletop RPGs, such as decision making, math skills. I know I've talked a little bit about some of the skills I've learned from tabletop RPGs, such as improv, storytelling, strategizing, and something in there that I found quite interesting is, I don't know if you explicitly said it like this, but here's how I interpret it somewhat, that being a character and being able to explain what is this person thinking right now, it almost feels like a simulated playground where you can try different things out that you couldn't try in real life. You can try like expressing emotions in different ways that, like, I haven't tried this before. Maybe it would work well here, and let's see how it feels. Like, tabletop RPGs aren't just a way for us to develop math skills and decision making skills and strategizing and a bunch of other aspects, but also a way for us to develop emotionally in some ways and to develop better social skills or to develop other skills that people may not initially think you can learn that from playing a game. It's fascinating. And I recently graduated from college, and one of the people I met there, as I was working on a bunch of research papers, is a guy who is actually writing a conceptual paper about teaching and developing through tabletop role playing games, and it was cool to read it because like this person and I, we connected over this idea of like learning and growing through these games and being able to read through that paper. I saw exactly this where almost anyone, no matter what kind of walk of life you come from, you sit down at the table and like you're no longer the big CEO of some big company, or you're no longer the preschooler kid who gets bullied a lot. You are Vlad the barbarian. You are like Jonas the cleric, and you're this new person where you can try out new personalities. You can try out new things to really develop different skills in your life, and it's, in my opinion, one of the best tools that you can possibly use for learning, growing, developing for anyone. So, really just wanted to nail that home a bit more. So, moving and growing a bit from that, can you tell me a bit more about how you prepare your stories and games? I've heard a little bit about it from preparing and going through some of your previous interviews, but I'd love to hear a bit about what it is that you do to really prepare your stories, your games, your experiences for whatever audiences that you're going to be presenting to that day.
So I love that question because I think definitely with tabletop RPGs, there is such an importance in preparation, especially doing the work I do. Um, and luckily, I have a few groups where I know everyone really well. So I can understand their triggers, their worries, things like that. And this may be something that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily say for tabletop role playing games, but one thing I really focus on is the mindset of what can I do and how can I tell the story? How can I have the combat? How can I have these things? How can I prepare questions so I know I'm honoring the sensory, emotional, mental needs of my players? And how can I make sure I'm not triggering them? In the work that I do, there's such an importance on, and I'm going to preface really quickly. There's such a need from time to time in Dungeons and Dragons because it can be a gory, brutal, intense kind of game. Um, in my work, and no game master should ever have to serve as a therapist or a provider if they don't want to. But in the work I do, I have to honor the realm of accessibility, not just as a physical movement, but as all of whom my players are. So I try to think through questions of how can I ask this person's trigger without triggering them? How can I tell the story in a sensory friendly way that doesn't, if they don't like a lot of gore, which a lot of people in the neurodiverse community have real sensitivities to that, how can I tell a story of abuse or corruption without reminding people of the traumas that happen so often in the world today? And building off of that, when I have some of those ideas, one of the other things that I really try to do is prep communication between me and my players. So it's not just asking the realm of those questions, it's also how can I keep myself in this emotional state to honor my players? How can I really work into the idea that if I have questions for them, they want to communicate with me, I'm keeping my tone honorable and consistent, not getting upset or angry. And then really into that, I build into the story, I develop my ideas. And I'll be honest, I'm sometimes a game master for chaos's sake. I'm a big advocate for game masters having at least one player that they know really does try to be earnest and considerate, but is the unintentional agent of chaos within a game. There have been so many times that it's like some of my favorite players have been people who they're trying to do something fancy, and I can just look at them watching a story and be like, just one of my favorite really quickly is the idea that I had people entering into an ancient old library, and I hadn't told my players that the stairs leading up were magical keys that would transport them to different realms as soon as they entered into the library. And we had a rogue who was trying to do a stealth check, did not make the check, and accidentally tripped, pants the player in front of her, the character, and then they were just scrambling on the staircase, activating all of these keys with pants just falling down, basically like a Three Stooges kind of thing for a moment there. Um, so I think that's really important. But one of the going off of that, I love that story. But one of the other major things is in my preparation is knowing which players I can throw key storytelling ideas to. So players that I know who can really develop the lore, really help with the exploration of the party, really help to drive the story forward, but I'm giving them a lot of the control, a lot of the ability to bounce off other players so that I can step back. Because I'm a huge advocate in saying that when I'm running events, my voice should be one of the most quiet from time to time. I should not be talking all the time. So those are a few key things. I don't want to keep going because there's so much I could talk on, but yeah, those are some of the key things I do in my sensory friendly work.
How can we get better at meeting the needs of our players slash listeners? I know we dove into a bit of trying to identify this person may be more sensitive to blood and gore. Maybe I try to tone it back in certain ways. While this person may be better for tossing certain story beats to because they may just be better at quickly picking them up. But just if we're trying to quickly assess, maybe if we're trying to quickly assess a group, because we're not always going to have the time to spend a lot of time preparing and researching, perhaps the people that we're working with or the world around us. How can we maybe try to quickly get a better grasp of the situation we might be falling into?
That's a great question. A lot of my work is actually that kind of scenario where people show up just to an event and I have to work with it. I would say a few things. Whether you're at a convention and you're leading a game, or you're at a community store and people show up, to help assess, I would always recommend make sure you make that connection as your players are walking in. Make sure that you talk to them, you emphasize interest in their interests, and that could be its own talk in so many different ways. And I recommend that it's actually genuine. Please don't fake it because people will know. The other thing when you're actually playing that I would say, and this can take a lot of work, just keep communication flowing. Um, Try to go, if you have to go with fantastical ideas or the situation where Nat 1 becomes a hilarious situation, the best thing I can say is pay attention to your players. If someone's grimacing because they don't like something, or someone's having a hard time with anxiety, try to tune into that. The best part of shared storytelling games is they are shared storytelling games. And I believe a good game master, and yes, this is hard, but it can get easier over time, really tunes into the players, really focuses on the subtle cues, the emotional cues, the noise level, so that you can really have those moments quickly and efficiently. And I can guarantee you, in a lot of sessions that I've done, that has kept a session going quickly, efficiently, and really capably. You can never plan 100% for players you don't know, but paying attention to their emotional, verbal, and even physical cues is a really great way to do that.
Hmm. So you mentioned communication a couple times of being able to communicate well with your players. You touched a bit on these like less like nonverbal communication things of is this person grimacing from this thing? Does this person seem to be retracting a bit from the table? What are some other ways that we might be able to open more lanes of communication between the speaker or dungeon master and the player or listener?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier like that honest interaction with players. Um, a couple things that I found are really helpful as well, especially if you have new players. Um, if there's a moment where they seem really excited about something or they're laughing, I recommend trying to laugh with them, enjoy the moment. Truly, the amount of times that I've shown up and um, on the other side of it is I've had a new player who really wants to work with something and homebrew an idea in. The other thing I'd say would be willing to work with your players. I know it can be really hard to do that if you don't know someone, but if someone throws a suggestion in, and you want to implement it, even if you need a few minutes to plan, tell your players you need a few minutes, call a break, have that conversation with that player, discuss with them why they want it, how they want to implement it into the story, um, what they're hoping to get, and then bounce those ideas throughout that story with those players. Ask why. I mentioned that I really like the idea of what is your player thinking right now, and part of the reason I ask that is so I can have an emotional cue into the character, so that I can better use the story and honor the player by asking them questions. Another thing that I've done in sessions where I've had a lot of players, like 10, 12 players, and people are getting bored because they're not having the story going, is, and this can be hard to manage and it requires some authority, but I actually go to each person. I say, okay, we're going to, in this moment, we're each going to narrate our own characters for a moment. And then say, like, we have 2 to 3 sentences to be able to do it. How is your character reacting to this? I know some of these ideas may seem like railroading players, um, but especially in moments where you have players you've never met, um, railroading isn't bad. I'm actually a big believer that railroading, when done right, is not forcing a player's down path. It's laying the tracks. It's helping to clear like emotional or mental trees so that you can keep going forward. It's the idea of like what they do with trains. You're helping guide someone down a path that, yes, has a lot of structure and a lot of design, but it actually really helps to keep the story moving. It keeps the intrigue going. So having those gentle moments of guiding the player a little bit more, understanding where they want to go, how they want to do it, and then creating that railroad in front of you is very helpful. And I'll tell you, a lot of the players that I've worked with, no matter their skill level, they actually really appreciate that from time to time, because it gives them a sustainable path forward. And the other thing I would say, just on communication, is take your players' comments personally. A game master who gets really intensely mad at the players is not going to be able to run a game. A game master who's constantly second guessing himself because they don't think that they can keep up with these new players isn't going to keep up with the new players. So I would work on being confident, showing that confidence because your players will see it as authority, and a lot of players will acknowledge that very quickly.
Absolutely. Again, there's a lot of interesting stuff that you touched on there, but I think the best way I can really describe and sum up a lot of what you said is that these skills aren't just good for tabletop role playing games. A lot of these skills and a lot of the things that you're doing, either as a player or as a dungeon master, they can be applied to many aspects of your life. If you're going to a board meeting, you're trying to present there, you want to have some sort of lanes of communication between you and the people you're presenting to. You want to know, are they reacting well to this? Can I change it a bit if they're not reacting well to it? Are there ways that I can, like, maybe I need to take a little break to fix a few things up, then we can come back to it, and it's going to be better than it was before. And this idea of if your players or your listeners are making negative comments about the thing, whatever the thing may be, it's this idea of separating the art from the artist, of that attack isn't against you. It's maybe there's something that you don't know about, that they're just reacting negatively to a certain thing about the game. It's just another form of communication. It's another thing that you can take and work with to say, they didn't react well to this. Okay, what can I do next time to make it better? Or how can I improve it for the future? Am I sort of on the right lines there?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that that I didn't think to say was keep yourself patient. Patience is a highly underrated skill in this world, I feel like, right now. And if you can react to even bad situations with patience, like genuine, sustainable patience, that's another thing that'll help you in your daily life, but it'll also really help you at your table. Patience is one of the main things that makes me a success, and it's one of the main things I would always recommend.
So, speaking of skills and success, in your opinion, what are some of the most important skills a person could learn that'll help them thrive in life?
Having just touched on it, I'll touch on it again. Patience.
Yep.
Patience is a virtue for a reason. It's an important part of life, and especially as someone who can show up to a D&D session and not know 9 or 10 players really well, my ability to step back, whether they be youth, adults, whatever, breathe and keep my calm is astronomical in those sessions. The other thing that I would say, revolving around communication, it's important to remove the ego in a lot of scenarios with communication. Um, I feel like a lot of people in today preach the mindset that, what you want is more important in a lot of scenarios. But healthy communication is also integral. I'm not here to say that putting yourself first, honoring your needs is not important because that's huge, but that does not mean we have to stop communicating in a way that works for other people or works for us when we need it, because honoring our needs is often helping to honor other people's needs. And communication and learning how to communicate when you are frustrated, upset, or anxious, and this is something I'm constantly working on to this day, is so huge. And the other thing that I would say that I think really makes me a massive, well, I shouldn't say massive, massive in my sense of the world, um, is empathy. Empathy ties into the other thing I mentioned. It ties into so much more, but genuine empathy towards ourselves, towards others, is a beautiful thing, and it'll get you much farther in life than I think some people want you to believe. Um, and regulating empathy is important as well. But all of those I feel like tie really well into each other, and I think they have really helped me to achieve things that I never thought I would.
Mm-hmm. All the skills that you mentioned there, these are all soft skills. These are skills that, so I love people when they advocate more for soft skills, because I often so on the show I talk to a lot of like professionals in their various fields. Salespeople have been a surprisingly common one as of late, and a lot of them will vouch for, yes, you have to learn sales. You have to learn like this specific skill. Which, sure, sales is a great skill, but the skills of patience, of communication, of empathy, These are skills that aren't just going to help you in one aspect of your life. And not to bash sales, it is a great skill and an important one to have for many people. But by being patient, by developing your communication, by developing your empathy, by really honing these soft skills, you can take them and apply them in every aspect of your life. By being patient at home, you're going to be better with the family. By being patient at work, you're going to be better with your coworkers. By being patient in a stressful situation, you're going to get through that stressful situation much better. And the same thing goes for communication and empathy. I feel like people really undervalue these soft skills in many ways because they're so hard to teach. But it's because they're so hard to teach that they're endlessly more valuable than the hard skills we might pick up at university. So like coding or engineering or who knows what else. Not to discount those skills, but these are really like these soft skills, patience, communication, empathy. They will take you so far in life. Those three alone. Yeah. One last thing I want to touch on about tabletop RPGs and storytelling, just a very general question. How can we be better storytellers?
I would have to say, so I've touched on a lot of things that I think will help us make better storytellers. A big one, and I think this falls into the realm of read, listen to stories. The general advice for writers and storytellers: expose yourself to things. Um, I think one that may not be as suggested as much um, is the idea that knowing that your stories are going to impact someone. There's going to be a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication, but what I would really say is just be considerate to what you're telling. Be considerate of yourself, be considerate of the people hearing you speak. Um, I know there's a lot of pushback against PC and, wokeness. I'm not going to really dive into why I am in a lot of ways, but what I'll say is when you really think of other people, when you think of the stories, when you think of how you're framing things, it's so important. And the other thing that I would add to that is if you're getting paid to be a storyteller, I know a lot of people want to be professional game masters, professional storytellers in a lot of ways. I would really recommend understanding what it is that drives you to do that and understand not just your story, but why you're telling it emotionally, mentally, figuratively. Part of the reason people love the stories I tell is there's an emotional human core to the stories, even if it's just evil bad guy wants to end the world. There are so many different things that we can add to that is so unique to the human experience, so intimidating, so overwhelming when you face that character. Um, and I'm not saying you have to keep everything sympathetic. I'm talking about like make your villains, make your characters, make your NPCs, make the story connect to your players and make them want to see that more and more. Um, I always say real life is the ultimate big bad evil guy in D&D. But when you're telling a story like everything I mentioned and your players want to come back, you are staving off that big bad evil guy every session.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. My group has a joke that scheduling is the real big bad evil guy, but real life probably a better answer to that. But so again, you touched on some great stuff there about storytelling and this idea of really building a story. In my sense, as you were describing it, it felt like building a story for your audience of who are you telling this story to? What's the story they need to hear? Because yes, it's good to write your own stories and tell your own stories, but you also have to tell them to someone. Otherwise, it's just a story for yourself. Not to say that's a bad thing, but stories that you write and tell for other people, those stories can go so much farther and have so much of a greater impact. Am I wrong?
I would definitely agree. Yeah.
So, thank you for talking and bringing on a bunch of expertise about storytelling and tabletop RPGs. I want to round this back out with some stuff on mental health and neurodiversity. What do you think is like why? How do I phrase this properly? Um, what do you wish people understood about neurodiversity that most people just it goes over their head or they don't even think about it?
So there's definitely two things, and this is something I struggle with a lot. Both of these, there's been so many things that I've had to unlearn in my life from my youth and other experiences. But few things that I want to touch on, and I can definitely explain these. One of the big ones, that just is a saying that I've been spreading a lot lately, which is just because someone doesn't understand doesn't mean it's their fault. The other thing that I would say is, and I talk about this a lot as well, is when someone's upset, or they're getting anxious, or the world feels like a lot, especially if they have mental health needs, they live with neurodiversity. I have to watch myself with some of the phrasing too from time to time.
Yep.
They are fighting against their brain, like the actual makeup of their brain, to try to communicate and control and understand their needs in a scenario that could be overwhelming, could be upsetting, and it makes it so much harder to communicate well. And kind of to wrap this up a little bit on these 3 points is the idea that, and I touched on this really early, when people define, problem children, problem mindset, stuff like that. I feel like a lot of people don't understand that some of the core human behaviors that society does not like are actually tied to some very significant diagnosis. And so when we push the idea that just because someone's acting out, not only is it limiting their communication, it's limiting them to a very strong ableism that a lot of people don't realize that they're implying on youth, on adults, on a lot of things. Um, all because of all of these things, I'm actually I can't stand a lot of shows because they do such a bad job honoring the community. But all of these things, if we start applying these mindsets and trying to understand the communication, the brain struggles, all these things a little bit more, we really can honor a community and start to phase out some ableism that really exists within a very strange mindset that still exists to this day.
Mm-hmm. I like that at the beginning of that you mentioned that just because someone doesn't understand, it doesn't mean it's their fault they don't. It doesn't mean it's their fault they don't understand. There's, I know personally, there's so much I don't know about, and that's part of the fun for me to have this show where I can bring people onto the show so I can try to learn, so I can try to understand these things. But I know that isn't always the case with some people. A lot of people just aren't exposed to certain bits of information, or they're just ignorant and they don't even realize it. But it's something that I wish more people could acknowledge that, oh, it's okay to be ignorant in some ways if you're trying to get better. But is there, can you think of any, how do I phrase this properly? Um, what advantages do you think neurodiversity may bring?
I think two really big ones. And this is, for some people, this may be like, what is he saying? And I can explain it. I think living with neurodiversity, living with mental health, it gives us a very unique perspective on the flaws of the world and helps us to understand other people better from the perspective of what we go through. The other thing that I would say is one of the things I love about these communities is there's a beauty to it. There's this really palpable understanding. I don't want to call it purity or anything like that because I feel like those terms kind of undermine the mentality that people with these diagnoses are not this commodity in the world that you can just pass along. What I would call it is there's an originality, there's an honesty, there's a brutal, opinionated aspect that can pop up but there's also a defiance against norms and opinions that don't work. And I think because of that, that's part of the reason I love the community. I always tell people, if you're bad at working with the neurodiverse community, they will tell you. Like, you will not continue. You will find out in that moment.
They're probably some of
Um,
the best customers because they'll just lay it out for you.
mhm. And all of those things are beautiful things. They can be really hard to deal with, but that's why I emphasize everything I've mentioned already.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think one thing I want to add to that is, at least from my experience, a lot of neurodiverse people are some of the greatest innovators you'll ever see
Mm-hmm.
because, like you said, they see the world differently. They see the flaws in the world in a different way, and they're not just going to sit back and take it. A lot of them will vocalize and say, "That's a problem. We can fix that." Where most people would say, "No, that's just a normal way of life." They'll see a problem that they can fix, and they can radically change the world. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't touch on, but it's because of these different thinkers. It's these people that they have the ability to see the world differently. They can really make some dramatic change out there. So, one final, I guess, sort of two-part question I wanted to discuss with you is I want to explore this question from two perspectives of how can we help neurodiverse people thrive in the world today? First, from the perspective of a neurodiverse person, and then maybe from the perspective of someone who isn't neurodiverse. How can we help neurodiverse people thrive more today? What can we do?
So I think a core part of it is, I think a really big, I've touched on so many things. I think the main thing is don't limit people by their diagnosis. Um, it's so integral to understand that there is ableism. There's a lot of isms out there that hold people back, and there's a lot of reasons why that might exist. Some of them, some people may think it's a good reason, some people may not. But when we limit people by their diagnosis, or I mentioned on this briefly, when we, you know, typecast people on TV, or argue that the mental health community are villainous in cop TV shows or something, um, there's a very distinct, very palpable ignorance and hatred and anger that can be spread against the community or people who do not deserve it as a whole. And so don't hold people back, but also the other thing I would say is honor those individuals for who they are, honor their ambitions, honor their love for things, because everybody has a right to pursue the work or the hopes or the dreams that they want to do in this world, no matter the country. And the easiest way to shut people down is to not take them seriously when they're sharing something they love to do.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, it's been an absolute pleasure to bring you on today. Before we end off, is there anything else that you want to mention? Any other topics that you think I've missed? Just anything.
I think we had a great conversation. The only other thing that I would just say really quickly to your audience, if you're listening to this or you're struggling or something really resonated, I highly recommend, especially if you're in need or you don't know where to turn, I recommend checking out your community resources. You never know when there's a gem waiting for you to find it, find an organization. And if you need help, there are so many great programs out in the world, so many different opportunities. And the last thing I will say is, if you're, want to be that game master that's as powerful and as influential as Matt Mercer or Brendan Lee Mulligan or something, I will let you know. It's a long, hard, difficult road, and it may not be that you work with the neurodiverse community because a lot of people don't want to, it's not the best way right now to make a ton of money. But who knows? Maybe you could be the next, great neurodiversity GM. I hope it inspires you. I hope you chase what you want to do.
Well, wonderful. Where can people go to see more of your work or to hear more from you?
Definitely. So I always have my email accessible at ndttrpg@gmail.com. realize those letters might be a little hard to track from time to time.
It'll be
I
in the
also have
description.
yeah. I also have my link tree, which you can check everything out. My LinkedIn is on there, so if you have questions, you can ask me on there. You can email me at any time. I also have all my most recent interviews and projects on there, so I highly recommend checking that out.
Oh, wonderful. Once again, Thomas, thank you so much for coming on. I love this conversation today.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, then please share it with a friend you think would like it or share it on social media. It would absolutely mean the world to me and it helps the podcast grow so much. With all that said, thanks for listening. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.